Hello, welcome to Chapter 2 of Psycho-cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz, Discovering the Success Mechanism Within You. Last week we talked about Chapter 1 and how we have servo mechanism machines within us, like a servo mechanism, and Dr. Maltz was saying that we need to use it as a success mechanism instead of a failure mechanism. So Chapter 2 begins to walk you through what using your servo mechanism as a success mechanism looks like. So he starts the chapter out talking about how every living thing has a built-in guidance system to help it achieve its goals, or in a broader sense, to live. So for animals, that basically means survival, to help them find food and shelter, or to avoid enemies or hazards, and procreation. But to live means a lot more for man. Like, man, it's not just about mere physical survival or physical needs. Man also has emotional needs and spiritual needs. So he talks about the difference between the guidance systems and how man's guidance system is a lot more complicated and broader than that of an animal. And then he goes on to talk about how a squirrel does not have to be taught how to gather nuts. A squirrel that's born in the spring and never seen winter, but yet fall comes along and you can still see the squirrel gathering nuts for winter. Or how a bird doesn't have to be taught how to build a nest or take a course in navigation. And yet birds will travel thousands of miles, sometimes even over open seas, to get to a warmer climate. So when talking about animals, we just call it instinct. Animals have instinct. But Dr. Maltz takes it a bit further and calls it a success instinct, meaning that animals are wired and built by God to succeed. But somehow we can recognize this in animals, right? We know that animals have the ability to adapt to their environment, and they just know how to do things. They know how to take care of themselves rather quickly. They don't have to be taught this. And we recognize it in animals, but somehow when it comes to us, we have a difficult time recognizing that humans, man, also has a success instinct. Matthew 10:29 says this: "What is the price of 2 sparrows? A copper coin? But not a single sparrow can fall to the ground without your Father knowing it." And then verse 31 says, "So don't be afraid. You are more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows." God did not put a success mechanism in the sparrow and then wire you for failure. That didn't happen. You are far more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. If He wired them for success, He wired you for success too. But God takes it a step further than with animals. Animals come with a preset or predefined set of goals. They don't get to choose. They don't get to choose their goals. They come pre-wired with predefined goals. But in God making us in His image, we are creators. He created us to be creators. We get to choose our goals. We can use our imagination to formulate a variety of different goals. We can decide to start a business. We can decide to lose weight or solve a problem or write a book or any number of things. We can decide that we're going to change our personality, that we're just going to be a better version of ourselves. We can choose that. Animals cannot choose that. So then he goes on to talk about how the success mechanism works. And very clearly, we are not a machine. You are not a machine. But cybernetics have, like the science of cybernetics, they have all come to the conclusion that your physical brain and your nervous system make up that servo mechanism. They make up that machine. So you're not a machine, but you in fact use a machine, a servo mechanism. And it works like a computer or a mechanical goal-seeking device. It works automatically, and he compares it to a self-aiming torpedo or a missile. So your built-in servo mechanism functions as both a guidance system to automatically steer you in the right direction to achieve goals or to make correct responses to your environment. It also operates as an electronic brain to solve problems, to give you answers, to provide new ideas. Servo mechanisms are constructed in a way to automatically seek or strive or complete a goal. It's constructed to automatically move towards that. And then he goes in to talk about the fact that there are two types of servo mechanism machines. The first type is where the goal or the outcome is known. You know what the target is, you know what the goal is, and it's your goal is to accomplish it. So that's the first kind of servo mechanism machine. The second is when the target is not known and the goal is to figure out or to learn or to solve a problem. And the human brain and the nervous system operates as both types. One, where the target is known, and two, where the target or the goal is not known. So then he goes on to talk about how one, like the target being known, is sort of like a self-guided missile or torpedo. Again, he uses a lot of those references. But he's talking about how a self-guided missile has sense organs in it. So they set the target, and then this missile or torpedo is moving towards that target, and it makes corrections. As it sees it's going off course, then it makes a correction, and then if it notices off course again, it makes another correction, and it responds to the negative feedback that it receives. And it adjusts, it automatically adjusts and makes movements. Another example of that in action, of using negative feedback to make adjustments, is a baby learning to pick something up. If you watch a baby like reaching for a rattle, you'll see its hand kind of like jerking and moving and like overshooting, but then coming back as they're learning to pick something up. They're automatically using negative feedback to adjust. And then he also goes on to talk about when you're learning to drive a car, how you overcorrect. If you are going this direction and you like overcorrect, you overturn your wheel until you get the adjustments right. So you're using negative feedback. That is when the target or the goal is known. When you select the goal and you trigger it into action, the machine takes over and makes adjustments as needed. And that's when the target is known. Two, the second is when the target is not known, when you're trying to solve a problem. And an example of that would be like if you're trying to think of someone's name and you can't think of it. And you're trying to come up with what that name is and you just cannot figure it out. But then hours later, after you've stopped thinking about it, all of a sudden it comes to mind. And that literally happened to me last night. I was having a conversation with someone and I was trying to remember the name of a person, and I kept thinking, man, I wish I could remember that name. Like, and you know, you feel like it's right there in the tip of your tongue, but you can't think of it. And then, of course, the conversation was over. We went about the rest of the evening, and then I got home last night, and as I was getting ready for bed, all of a sudden, I remembered the name. It came to me. So that's kind of like when the target is not known, but you've given the machine, your servo mechanism, you've given your machine a problem to solve. And it goes to work searching the database and looking for the answer. And it doesn't stop looking for the answer until it's found it, until it's solved the problem. So the human brain and nervous system, our servo mechanism works in both ways. Target known, target not known. It works in both. Then he goes on to talk about the automatic machine in action. And he talks about how we marvel at the idea of an interception missile. Again, his references, not mine. But we marvel at the fact that this missile can make all of these needed adjustments and just know how to show up at the exact point of contact of another missile. And he's talking about how that is really amazing to us. But then he talks about how an outfielder in baseball is the same thing. An outfielder, a fly ball is coming to this outfielder, and they automatically make all of the adjustments needed to show up at the exact point of interception of that ball, the exact point of contact. The servo mechanism within us, or within that outfielder, is scanning all information that is within its database, pulling in all of the different ideas and different information together to show up at the exact moment when that needs to happen. And it happens so quickly that we don't even recognize that it's happening. But that is the servo mechanism in works. That is it happening. And it is a marvelous, amazing thing. And then he goes on to talk about how science can build the computer, can build the machine, but cannot build the operator. So scientists build servo mechanisms all of the time, the machine, the computer. So the example is in the self-guided missile or the interception missile, like how they can build that machine. I work in a manufacturing company, and we have robotic welders within our plants, and they run on a computer program. So you put in the goal, the target, all of the steps, and all of the things that you want this machine to do, and it automatically accomplishes that goal. But scientists can't build the operator. So in this sense, talking about humans, our subconscious mind, the thing that is just as I said last week, is the program that we're running in the background all of the time. They can build the program, but our conscious mind is the operator. They can't build the operator. A computer cannot pose problems to itself. A computer doesn't have a forebrain. A computer can't decide the goal. It can only operate and work on the program already installed, or the feedback that it receives from its sense organs that's already built into it, or from previously stored data. When you're working on the computer, you can find all kinds of stuff, and it can operate on the stuff that's already stored. But it can't pose the problem itself. It can't decide the goal. So scientists can build the computer, but they can't build the operator. They can't build the conscious brain. When we go to find an answer or solve a problem, we have to know and believe that the answer already exists somewhere. We have to know that it's out there, and then we seek to find it. But we have to believe that it's already there. And here's how all of this works. You have to change your mental picture of yourself. We talked before about how positive self-talk or positive affirmations or positive talk doesn't work when we're trying to address the exterior. It only works if we change the self-image. And that's what he's saying. You can't change a failure-type personality by pure willpower or arbitrarily deciding to do so. there must be some grounds, some justification, some reason for deciding that the old picture of self is an error and that a new picture is appropriate. So you can't just decide, oh, I'm going to change how I feel about myself. In order for that to happen, you have to believe that how you see yourself right now is an error, that there's something not right about that before you can actually set out to change your self-image. You cannot merely imagine a new self-image unless you believe that there's some truth to it. So you have to seek the truth of what is really true, of who you really are, before you can decide to change your self-image. And then he goes on to say, experience has shown that when a person does change his self-image, he has a feeling that for some reason or another, he finally sees or realizes a truth about himself. Meaning, experience has shown that a person only changes their self-image when they realize that how they see themselves is wrong and that they can see truth in a new way of seeing themselves. And then he ends the chapter with talking about the things that we need to do to change our self-image. So then Maxwell Maltz, he goes in and he says, science has now confirmed what philosophers, mystics, and other intuitive people have declared all along. Every human being has literally been engineered for success by his creator. Every human being has access to a power greater than himself. This means you. As Emerson has said, there are no great and no small. We all have the same opportunity. We all have access to the same great power. If you were engineered for success and happiness, then the old picture of yourself as unworthy of happiness, of a person who was meant to fail, must be an error. Again, if God wired the sparrow for success, he didn't wire you for failure. You were built for success. If you're not succeeding, then it is simply because the program has an error. There's an error in your thinking. There's an error in the way that you're seeing yourself and you're portraying yourself. Because again, and we'll say it 1,000 times, you cannot outperform your self-image. You have to improve your self-image if you want to improve your performance. But in order to improve your self-image, you have to know and believe that how you feel about yourself might just be wrong. If you think that you were meant to be a failure, or you were wired for failure, or you were meant to live a life less than, then you have to recognize that it's an error. That's how you begin the change. So then he goes on to say, he gives a practical exercise. This is the first practical exercise of beginning to change the way you see yourself, to begin changing your servo mechanism into a success mechanism. So this is what he says. He says, memorize the following basic principles by which your success mechanism operates. So these are the principles that operate your success mechanism. You do not need to be an electronic engineer or a physicist to operate your own servo mechanism, any more than you have to be able to engineer an automobile in order to drive one, or become an electrical engineer in order to turn on the light for your room. You just need to be familiar with the following 5 principles. And here are the principles. Principle 1. And he says to memorize these. So rewind this, play it back so that you can write them down so that you can memorize them. And begin the change work. Begin the changing the belief system so that we can begin working on changing the self-image. So 1, your built-in success mechanism must have a goal or a target. We give it goals and targets whether we realize we do or not. That's not part of the principle, sorry. Your built-in success mechanism must have a goal or a target. This goal or target must be conceived of as already in existence, either now, in actual or potential form. It operates by either 1, steering you to a goal already in existence, or 2, discovering something already in existence. I'm going to read that one more time. Your built-in success mechanism must have a goal or target. This goal or target must be conceived of as already in existence now, either in actual or potential form. It operates by either steering you to a goal already in existence or discovering something already in existence. That's 1. Principle 2. The automatic mechanism must be oriented to end result goals. Do not be discouraged because the means whereby may not be apparent. It is the function of the automatic mechanism to supply the means whereby when you supply the goal. Think in terms of the end result, and the means whereby will often take care of themselves. So basically he's saying in principle 2, if you don't know how you're going to get there, right? You know that you have a goal. There's some end results that you want. There's a goal. But you don't know how you're going to get there. And he's basically saying, even if you don't know, even if the steps aren't apparent to you, don't worry about that. You supply the goal, and the servo mechanism will become responsible for the result. That how will often take care of itself if you provide the goal. That's principle 2. Principle 3. Do not be afraid of making mistakes or of temporary failures. All servo mechanisms achieve a goal by negative feedback or by going forward, making mistakes, and immediately correcting course. I'm going to read that again. Do not be afraid of making mistakes or of temporary failures. All servo mechanisms achieve a goal by negative feedback, by going forward, making mistakes, and immediately correcting course. It's okay. When the course, nothing happens with a self-guided missile or torpedo. It doesn't react to the positive feedback. It only reacts to negative feedback. So when we're moving forward and we're not doing it perfectly, just like a baby learning to pick something up or learning to drive, if we're not doing it perfectly, you react to the negative feedback, your course corrects. But if you're afraid to even start, if you're afraid to even begin, then there is no negative feedback. And if there is no negative feedback, there is no course correction. And if there is no course correction, there is no achieving a goal. So don't be afraid of mistakes. Mistakes, those little errors, those temporary failures, is part of the process. It's part of the process to success. Principle 4. Skill learning of any kind is accomplished by trial and error, mentally correcting aim after an error until a successful motion, movement, or performance has been achieved. After that, further learning and continued success is accomplished by forgetting the past errors and remember the successful response so that it can be imitated. So again, it's a trial and error thing. We're all going through life for the first time, right? None of us have done this already. Life is about trial and error. Life is about learning what works and what doesn't. And sometimes we make some mistakes and it's like, oh, well, that doesn't work. But then we find out something that does work. Oh, this does work. And we go forward by learning what does work and what doesn't. So understand, it's trial and error. We're all going through this for the first time. Just keep moving forward. And then the final principle, principle 5. You must learn to trust your creative mechanism to do its work and not jam it by becoming too concerned or too anxious as to whether it will work or not, or by attempting to force it by too much conscious effort. You must let it work rather than make it work. This trust is necessary because your creative mechanism operates below the level of consciousness, and you cannot know what is going on beneath the surface. Moreover, its nature is to operate spontaneously according to the present need. Therefore, you have no guarantees in advance. It comes into operation as you act and as you place a demand upon it by your actions. You must not wait until you have proof. You must act as if it were there, and it will come through. Do the thing and you will have the power, said Emerson. So basically, you have to trust your servo mechanism. You have to trust that God wired you for success and that you do have the answers. And all of the psychology and the counseling classes that I've taken and all of the coaching classes that I've been taking, one of the things that is like present in all of them is the fact that you already have the answer. You may not know what it is, and you may not currently be able to access the answer, but the answer is there. So you have to learn to trust yourself. You have to learn to trust that God wired you for success. The answer's there. The success is there. The potential is there. Now we just have to work on changing the programming so that we can get there. But in order to do that, you have to trust it. You have to trust that that God made it possible. That God wired you for success. Next week, we're going to be talking about imagination. Chapter 3 is imagination, the first key to your success mechanism. So we've introduced you to the success mechanism. We know that you have it. We all have it. God did not leave us out. And then next week, we're going to start talking about how to bring that about. And that is, the first key to that is your imagination. Re-listen to those 5 principles over and over again. He actually, in the book, says to read that chapter 3 times a week for 21 days. So for 3 weeks, he's telling you to read that chapter multiple times. And again, it's going back to that idea that you have to believe that if you believe yourself to be a failure, then you have to believe that that is an error before you can even begin changing how you see yourself. So he's saying to understand the principles and what God created you to be and designed you to be before you can even start moving forward. So again, understand you are far more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. If He wired the sparrows for success, He wired you for success. I promise you that. I hope this helped you, and I love you guys, and I will see you next week as we talk about how to use the imagination and start that success instinct. Talk to you later. Bye.